Thank you for watching my video. If you haven't seen part one, watch part one, which is an in-depth analysis of Israeli missile defense systems against anti-Israeli threats using command modern operations. I ran that. This is the after-action report, and it's also looking at modeling if the warheads that have penetrated had been nuclear tipped, what kind of casualties would we have seen? I think we've seen real-life examples, conventional missile strikes, recently with the Iranian engagement against Israel. The casualties, especially the dead, was relatively low, in the low double digits, with a greater number of casualties from wounded and stuff. But when we jump into a nuclear realm, those casualties would tremendously increase. And so, the whole strikes came about with the prevention of Iran from developing nuclear weapons. So this kind of looks at what if we have crossed that threshold. They have a nuclear program now with enough warheads to engage Israel and engage with their missile defense systems. So again, the last video you saw a mix of systems, both US and Israeli, including the Iron Dome for short-range missiles, David Sling, medium. You have Arrows 2 and 3 for longer range missiles. You have the THAAD batteries. You had Patriots, the Hawks. You had a Arleigh Burke Aegis ballistic missile defense ship. You also had F-35s and F-16s and Growlers up in the air. So you had a whole mix of systems. And we'll go over the deep dive in there. I went through all the analysis and everything, but to start with, let's look at something kind of more visually appealing. This would be, okay, and I haven't put in all the warheads that were intercepted because, again, this doesn't really do the interceptions. Command modern operations does that. This is simply to model the casualties if these would be nuclear strikes. We have a mix of low yield 10 kiloton warheads and higher yield 100 kiloton warheads. These are all coming. I'm using Russian-based screwdriver missile systems to demonstrate it. And this is based on where the actual warheads penetrated. So we had a total of 22 warheads that made it through the Israeli missile defense system. 6 of them hit Jerusalem, 11 hit Tel Aviv, and 5 hit the Ramat David Air Base. So that's where we have the air base, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem targeted with the exact number of warheads that was in the simulation. I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Let's kind of take a look here. We'll see these mobile launchers will take a second. Even at 10 times speed, they're going to have to deploy their erectors, pun intended, before firing their missile. Let's go a little faster than that. All right, so we see them coming in now. I chose 12 low yield and 10 higher yield. And again, I distributed the high and low yield between the different target locations based on number of warheads. So Tel Aviv again would have a greater amount of the higher yield, but proportional. So if you watch the other video, you'll be able to see multiple incoming missiles, multiple interceptors being fired back. Also tried to model electronic warfare with the Growlers and stuff. And you would see that there was a number that either missiles that weren't intercepted, but they also completely missed a target, not causing any damage. And that could have been due to some of the electronic warfare aspects of the missile defense systems. Also, you would see that some of the interceptors will go into, like the Iron Dome, which are not designed to intercept these longer range ballistic missiles, may have successfully intercepted, so to speak, but only caused a minor deviation in its trajectory, and it still landed in the city and still caused damage. So, like I said, it was a mix. So when you look at the number of successful intercepts, you have to temper that with the idea, though, did they actually stop the incoming warhead? Did they prevent deaths on the ground? Or was the missile able to still get through and still strike its target, only just being slightly off-center? And slightly off-center in conventional means definitely has an impact, especially if they're trying to strike military targets, being slightly off, a deviation of, a kilometer could make a big difference. When it comes to cities, that might not make as big a difference. And when it comes to nuclear warheads, it makes even less of a difference. All right, let's go ahead and run the casualties calculator here. Let me see here. Let's take a look. So already you see 2 million Israeli casualties. Over 200,000 in Jordan. You'd have fallout spreading across. 285,000 in Palestine. And 15,000 in Syria. Again, we're getting a little bit coming through here. Let's look at the fallout for long-term dosage, and that's what you see from the Syrian and Jordanian casualties. So definitely a extreme negative impact. For a country the size of Israel, population-wise, that's 25% of their population. That would be absolutely devastating. Now, of course, it's the world's worst kept secret that Israel has nuclear weapons of their own. They would obviously be capable of a even larger retaliatory strike. Iranian, defenses were shown that they could be seriously degraded, where Israel was able to operate over Iranian airspace with relative impunity. Now, they were using standoff weapons and stuff, but don't fall into the trap that just because they still use stealth, they still make precautions, that doesn't mean that they weren't operating in a relatively air superiority. You're still going to utilize every precaution, just like the B-2 stealth bombers when we sent them in to drop those Moabs. They went in with a huge package. Of course, you're going to protect some of your most vital strategic assets. You're not going to send them in by themselves. You're going to have everything behind them. I mean, we only have low double-digit numbers of B-2 Spirit bombers. They're going to be phased out with the B-21 Raider, but that's still being in test flights now. We'd be idiots to send them in there and put them at risk. So we were gonna safeguard them with everything had only made sense. So you see there, and I'm sure there's going to be another 300,000 cancer fatalities when we look long term, but 2.5 million losses. Massive areas having to be evacuated would be absolutely devastating to that country. I mean, to lose a quarter of your population like that in a matter of 2 hours, you can only imagine that kind of impact. So, after Atchison Port, last mission, so what I had to do was, let me open something up here. So, anytime you do command modern operations, it's going to have a log of everything that took place. So I had to sift through all of this stuff here, all these little lines, to find out what missiles got through, what got intercepted, and by what did the interception, and how many of those interceptors were actually fired. Primarily, none of their short-range rockets made it through. Primarily, you had the Shahab 3B and then the Fatah, and apologies if I mispronounce those. I mispronounce a lot of things. Were the ones getting through. Now these were actually modeled as hypersonic glide vehicles, so giving them a better chance of penetration compared to a standard ballistic missile. Now, it's a lot of, a misunderstanding when we talk about hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles are not anything new. Hypersonic missiles have been around forever. Any type of ICBM is a hypersonic missile. What they're really talking about is the ability to change trajectory during its flight. That's what separates it. That's what makes it dangerous and harder to intercept. So let's take a look here. Nice little thing I put together. So it showed we had 6 hits to Jerusalem, 10 hits to Tel Aviv, 5 to Ramat David, one to this rather Dune-sounding name, Ben Barak, which I just placed in Tel Aviv just to keep it simple, by the way. So interceptors. The Stunner is the David Sling missile. It intercepted 6 for 6 being fired. But keep in mind, those were short-range rockets. Those were not ballistic missiles. It did not engage the ballistic missiles. Arrow 2 and 3 was averaging about 50% interception rate. And it's going to play into the SM3s. And I'll tell you why when we get to the SM3s. But about 50% interception rate. Iron Dome is going to show a tremendous interception rate, 80%, 53 of 66. Most of those were engaging those longer range ballistic missiles. So most of them, like I said, you got to temper the idea that, yes, it hit a lot of them or detonated near a lot of them, but most of it only caused minor deviations in the trajectory, and it was still hitting its intended targets. In fact, the deviation was very, very slight. There was a couple that were did cause a more significant deviation. And by the way, it's not the only one that caused a deviation. So like the AIM-120s, like the 9 out of 12, was causing deviations to the trajectory. But they did get close. Patriots, 60% interception rate. The Hawks, 50%. The THAAD never engaged. And again, temper that with the idea that a lot of that's based on where the placement is. There wasn't a lot of targeting near there, and it can only engage under certain trajectory and arcs. So depending on where the missile is, what phase of the missile's in, and whether it can engage in that range. So placement of your missile defense systems is absolutely vital to how well they're going to be able to intercept. So if I were to place these differently, you would see different numbers, right? So it's all about knowing the system and the placement. So I want to be clear about that as you look at some of these percentages. So the air units did engage on the incoming missiles, just like in real life, where our fighter jets are engaging incoming. The 120C and 120D, the C had a better success rate as far as hitting, and the D was 1 for 4. The Hawk, by the way, 50%. That's an older U.S. medium range missile defense system, still used by Israel and several other countries for that matter. So the SM3s were from the Arleigh Burke. First off, the Arleigh Burke was positioned a little further away from where the incoming missiles were coming. Second, a lot of those were missiles that were intercepted by the Arrow 2 and 3 before they got there. So you would see that it wasn't so much a miss so much as they didn't have their targets were gone by the time they got closer to the system. SM3 is the longer range interceptor system. It's a mid-course interceptor. It's actually been tested against an ICBM-like weapon, even though it's not designed to intercept ICBMs. It was tested against one and did successfully intercept it. So it puts it a little closer to the ground-based mid-course interceptor or the Arrow 2 and 3 than it would, say, a THAAD or the SM-6. So the SM-6 is designed to intercept in the terminal phase, just like the THAAD. That's when the missile's coming back down to the Earth at extremely high speeds. So that had 11 out of 16 success rate, very capable system. SM2, an older system, 2 out of 10, 20% success rate. So, and again, you got to temper that with placement. What was it targeting? Was that already intercepted or did it truly miss? A lot of different questions. Again, it takes a lot of time to read through the data. It took me a little bit of time to go through this. But definitely gives you an idea of the engagement of the different systems, penetration rates. So overall, I believe we would have had, let's see here. $139 intercepts. That was roughly, I think I sent off about 174 missiles. We had 22 get through. So I'm counting for about 161. Now, some of those that got through would be in this number of the Iron Dome and the AIM-120s, where it was only a minor deviation, but it's still targeted. So what about the other ones they missed? Some of that could be due to the electronic warfare from the Growlers and the other items. It could be that the weapons malfunctioned, so that is modeled into the simulator, and it could be that they simply missed their targets. So it's a mix of things, just like in the real world. So as far as that looks like, though, we say 139 against, what did I say? Let's say, I can't remember, 174. So roughly 80% success rate as far as intercepts go. Actually, just slightly under 80%. Not bad, against, again, real world. And it's tough with real world because we're based on reporting from various sides that have a vested interest and either saying it was either more successful or less successful, depending on which side you're on. Goes back to the Desert Storm with the Patriots when they were first used in combat. And they were first reported to have a very massive success rate, and then later showed that it had a 0% success rate. And the truth was probably somewhere in the middle. So again, sometimes they didn't destroy the incoming missile, but they hit it with enough shrapnel that it caused it to miss target and deviate. So it's very difficult anytime, especially in mid-conflict. Casualties are always exaggerated on the side that has or intercept anything. It's always exaggerated. I mean, look at the recent Indian and Pakistan conflict in the air. Some people will tell you that India shot down, or Pakistan shot down 6 Rafales. Most people seem to agree it was 1 Rafale. Some people, especially on the Indian side, will tell you it's 0 Rafales and that they shot down 6 Pakistan planes. Again, people have vested interest. So, but seems fairly close to real world intercept rates, different points in the conflict. Like I said, a lot of factors. Where they're shooting from. Do you know where they're shooting from? And the only thing I didn't deploy was satellites. So satellites would have gave even more early detection. Could have meant repositioning of ballistic missile assets to have an even better intercept chance. So those are things that weren't modeled in the sim. So that could have an impact as well. So I encourage you, like I said, if you didn't see the other video, please watch it. There's a link in the description. And I'm doing a whole series with Command Modern Operations. Like I said, it's the best simulator for testing modern weapon systems available to civilians. My next video is going to be all about how in the civilian commercial sector, different ways you can model nuclear conflict and the different kind of simulators and my thoughts on different things, even including free stuff like the nuclear weapons website where you can test detonations, all the way up to kind of what I'm doing, which is a mix of systems. So I'm utilizing Command Modern Operations and Nuclear War Simulator to model the weapon systems and then the detonations. So just like in this 2-part video, Command Modern Operations modeled whether or not how many warheads got through, and this modeled how many casualties from those warheads. So stay tuned. Going to be more videos like this. Please like and subscribe. Please have a great weekend. Have some scotch and a nice succulent Chinese meal on me. Thanks, everybody.